Hi, my little calaveras, and welcome to or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, welcome. My name is Jinx, and if you're coming back, welcome back. Alrighty, so today I have a creepy lake tale for you, and it's titled Not Everything Drowns. So, if you're ready to hear this creepy tale, sit back, relax, and let's enjoy the story together. It's not an easy job, scavenging the lake. It's filthy, for one. All those rich jerks from the cities come in on their six-figure boats to convene in Party Cove, where they vomit and piss themselves to dehydration right into the water. By this point, the composition of the lake is probably more cores and E. coli than H2O. Second, you don't get a whole hell of a lot out of it. Some days you make bank. Gold watches and expensive sunglasses that just need cleaning to be ready to sell for a nice profit. You'd be shocked what people will take and subsequently lose in the water. I once found a whole wallet stuffed with $300 in the muck at the bottom of the lake. Once those bills dried out, they spent the same as any other. But most days, you don't hardly find anything at all. It's seasonal too. This time of year, there ain't nobody out except the local fishermen. And I'll be damned if they have anything worth diving for. I use the winters to expand my horizons, branch out beyond Grand Glaze, and explore the rest of the lake. That's what brought me out to this unexplored cove, hoping to find something buried in the muck. It was a cold, gray day, the kind where all you want to do is curl up with a nice bottle of whiskey and sleep most of it away. That was out of the question for me, on account of I'm an entrepreneur and all. Instead, I drove my little John boat out along the lake's jagged coastline until I came to the cove I'd been eyeing on my map. There was not a soul around, and when I shut off the motor, I couldn't hear anything but silence. The coast, this far down, lacked the boat slips and cheap condos that marred the landscape elsewhere. Nothing but gray oaks and hickories as far as I could see. I took a moment to enjoy the calmness of it all. Before suiting up, I took my time getting ready. Partly, it was out of habit, and partly, it was because I had no particular desire to submerge myself into the frigid water. There was always that game this time of year. Chicken against myself, until my balls were well and truly fortified. I dangled my fins over the edge of the boat and dropped down into the murky water. If you never lake dived before, you may not understand what murky truly means. It means you're screwed when it comes to seeing more than a few inches in front of your face. The silt stirs up with barely any movement at all. And I'm not a graceful fella. Frog kicks or no. Anyway, Viz was low, as always in the lake. I spent the first part of the dive feeling around in the soft mud a couple 100 feet off the shore, but not much was coming up. Fishing lures, flip-flops, crumpled beer cans, the usual. I slowly began moving towards deeper water, hoping to find something worthwhile so that I could go home and do that whiskey thing. I was down deep, probably 15 meters, when I saw the first tree. Trees weren't necessarily an unusual sight. When they made the lake, they flooded the whole goddamn countryside just about. Trees, fields, homes. Mostly, they razzed it all beforehand. But sometimes you stumble on tree trunks. This, however, was not a tree trunk. It was a whole tree. Branches, leaves, and all. Just like it was the middle of the summer. In the brown cast of the water, the leaves shone green and full, practically shimmering and throbbing with life. I looked up. In the dim, muddy light, the branches extended up as far as I could see. I felt suddenly small and vulnerable in the dark shadow of the canopy. I kicked my legs behind me, propelling forward past the tree. To my surprise, I was greeted by another, and another after that. A long stretch of living trees stood in line on either side of me, a promenade at the bottom of the lake. At first, I thought I was getting turned around, passing the same tree over and over again. Like I said, Viz was low. But no, I was swimming down a goddamn tree-lined street, right there, under the lake. The current was slow, and the silt settled around me, opening up some of the view. In front of me, the line of trees extended as far as I could see. Behind me, the same. To my right was an open, grassy space. To my left, a 2-story building surrounded by a cluster of smaller wooden ones. I was in a town. I swam toward the building. I could make out a single word on the wooden sign. Lynn. I blinked, and as I did so, the building transformed into a burned husk of a structure. I blinked again and shook my head. The building was back as it was, intact and undisturbed. I paddled backwards, feeling suddenly uneasy. What had been an interesting find was turning into something else entirely. That's when I had another thought. Where were the fish? I spun around, but saw no sign of life anywhere. There was no movement in the grass, in the trees. I needed to surface. That was all I knew. I was about to swim up when I caught something out of the corner of my eye. Something shot between 2 buildings. It was bigger than a fish, but I couldn't exactly tell what it was. My blasted curiosity got the better of my common sense. I swam towards it. The dark figure darted again between the buildings, and I followed at a distance. Finally, it stopped long enough so I could see it clearly. It was a kid, or something not unlike a kid. It was hard to see through the muck that I stirred up. The figure was dark and small, but shaped like a person. It stopped in front of a small, white house. Bicycles and dolls dotted the green lawn. Before it disappeared into the open door, I could have sworn I heard a giggle. I stared at the house, frozen in disbelief and fear. A dull yellow light pulsed slowly in the window. Despite myself, I moved toward it, pulling through the grassy yard. The grass was still intact, undisturbed by the water that surrounded it. I grabbed onto the window pane, trying my best to keep out of view. Through the window, a family sat around a dinner table, their hands clasped together in what looked like prayer. Candles burned in the middle of the table, their flames flickering even though surrounded by water. There were 6 people, 2 larger figures, 4 smaller. The smallest couldn't have been more than a toddler. Even through the murky water, I could tell they were burned. Flakes of blackened skin floated along their naked, charred bodies, held on by thin slivers of tissue. I gulped down air from my regulator. None of it made sense. These bodies were clearly dead, burned, and drowned. There was no way candles could be lit underwater. There was no way any of this was happening. I shut my eyes and opened them again. The family was still there, still with bowed heads. One of the little ones raised its head, and I watched, wide-eyed, as it pointed a thin finger in my direction, its mouth opening in surprise. The others turned their heads slowly, deliberately, to look at me. I scrambled back, falling away from the window. The scene inside vanished from my view, but not before I caught sight of the largest one rising from its seat. I turned and swam, not worrying about the muck I was kicking up behind me. It was a mistake. I wasn't sure which direction I was headed as I started to swim upwards. I hit my head hard on a tree limb, and the pain drove me back down, suspending me just beyond the yard of the burned house. A low moan rippled through the current, close and mournful. I was crushed by the sense of dread and sorrow. For a moment, I felt like I could cry, like I was so far removed from light and joy that even saving my own life was fruitless. In the midst of the pain and the heartache, the moan stopped, and the water cleared. They were behind me, just standing and watching, all in a row, biggest to smallest. The little one had its hand raised in front of its eyes, as if it couldn't bear to watch. My stomach sank as I swam away, pulling against the current that seemed hell-bent on dragging me back towards the house. In my panicked flailing, my breath grew shallow, and I realized I had something else to worry about. How long had I been underwater? The depth and the exertion? My air. I looked down at my pressure gauge, and my heart sank. During my dive training, one thing that was drilled into my head over and over again was how important it was to remain calm, particularly when you are low on air. I don't imagine the instructor had underwater fire zombies in mind when he gave that talk. I squeezed my eyes shut and clenched my fists. "Don't look back," I repeated to myself, trying to banish the black figures from my mind. But I did look back. They were still standing behind me, just as they had been. I concentrated on my breathing. In, out, slowly. They weren't pursuing me at the very least. I could do this. I could swim back to my boat and be fine. I just had to move. Why wasn't I moving? As I hovered there, held in place by the current that swirled around me, I watched in growing understanding that the largest figure opened its mouth. The water burst into waves around him, circling out wider and wider. The moan. If I had to hear it again, I knew I wouldn't move. I knew I couldn't move in that crushing sadness. I knew I'd fall into the lake floor and watch my air dwindle to nothing and be glad for it. I clenched my fist and swam hard, my muscles protesting and my lungs burned as I propelled myself through the water. It felt thick and viscous, like I was swimming through chowder. Dimly, I could see the gray light of the winter sky above me, and I pushed past what my aching legs and empty lungs would allow. When I reached the surface, I could have cried. Nearly did, if I'm being honest. I took out my regulator and gulped down the cold air in desperate, heaving breaths. When at last my lungs stopped quivering, I saw I was further away from my boat than I guessed. It glinted across the empty lake as I slowly made my way back to it. I collapsed onto the aluminum boat and lay shivering until well past dark. My mind slipped over what I had seen, barely grasping something before retreating again into the fog. When the cold became too much to bear and hypothermia became a legitimate concern, I started the motor and headed towards home. Home. What a fucking joke. When every piece of furniture was blackened and charred until I blinked and it shimmered back into normalcy. The place stank of mildew and fish and burning flesh. Not even a gallon of pine-scented bleach could change it. Home. I didn't dive again. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I told my diving buddies that the winter cold had been too hard on my joints. Asked them if they'd seen anything strange underwater. Strange, they asked? Like stranger than bikini tops and rescue inhalers? Something like that, I told them while they shrugged. I took to hanging out at the library since it was warm and didn't stink of bloated death. I learned a lot about the lake and its history. Did you know, for example, that when they flooded the towns to make the lake, they burned them first? Just burned whole towns to the ground. What a thing. Of course, they evacuated it first. Of course. No one stayed behind to get burned up in their homes. Of course. Hi, my little calaveras. Now, if you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. Also, like, comment, share, all the good things. And I hope you enjoyed this story. It was kind of sad, kind of creepy, but I definitely think that some of those man-made lakes that are created in a similar process are definitely creepy and would never, never want to go to one. And then on top of that, I would never want to dive into one. But that's just me. You can always comment below if you would go to a lake like this or if you wouldn't. But yeah, don't forget that In my description box, I have my socials linked if you want to keep up to date with everything that's going on with the channel. I also have like my email and my Reddit there if you want to read any of the stories that I write, or if you want to submit a story to be potentially read here. But I am starting to ramble, so let me go ahead and go. But before I go, remember, my little calaveras, don't let anyone or anything steal your light. Check under your bed at night. And until next time, bye.